Hello, YouTube. This is Tony Young, doing the first of what is hopefully many reviews. Today it's a review of Doctor Sleep by Stephen King. And Doctor Sleep is a very interesting novel. Some of you who've heard of it as probably know it's a sequel to The Shining, which is probably my favorite Stephen King novel, next to Carrie. Um, It's so interesting because it is not like other sequels. Most sequels you get are just basically rehashes of the original story with the children of the original characters, or sometimes even just a character that's completely unrelated to the original story, but it just happens to take place at the same place. But Doctor Sleep is completely unlike that. It has got Danny Torrance in it, and so it is about his story, but Danny was the main character in the original story. And yes, Abra is a new character, and she is basically a female Danny, except she's way cooler, and she's a preteen. Well, teenager by the end of the book, but she starts off as a baby, but then we see her grow up, and for the main meat of the story, she's a preteen. She's about 12, I think. Basically, the story goes that Danny Torrance has spent his life similarly to how his father does. He becomes an alcoholic and he just sort of, bums around. Um, and, eventually he ends up in this place called Fraser, New Hampshire, and joins AA, gets clean, and starts working as a hospital, hence where the title comes in, Doctor Sleep. Around the time that he starts AA, his powers start coming back because apparently getting drunk all the time dulled his powers, I guess. And his powers come back, and he starts using them to help people die, basically, when he works at a nursing home. And when he has a patient who is about to die, he uses the Shining to basically make things a little less painful, I guess. Um, which is an interesting idea. At the same time, we're watching the childhood of this girl named Abra Stone. And we just basically watch her early childhood, and she has the same type of powers that Danny had. So we go throughout her life. There's also this other storyline, which at first doesn't seem entirely connected. The story of the True Knot. And the best way that I can describe the True Knot is that they're like a cult, a vampiric cult that lives on sucking out the essence of children who have the Shining. They are actually described as they are actually described as being vampiric, at some point towards the later half of the book. Um, the nice thing about the True Knot is that they're not. I mean, they are villains. They're terribly evil, and they're obviously, Rose the Hat, who is the leader of the True Knot, is obviously the big bad of the story. But they're kind of sympathetic villains in a way. Um, I'm not sympathizing at all with the child killing. That's monstrous. It's terrible, and they got what's coming to them. But they're like normal people. They love. They are capable of having real emotions. And you do kind of feel bad for them when some of their mates are killed. I mean, not very bad, of course, because, bear in mind these people have killed millions of children throughout their lives. Um, for some reason, the they call it steam. The essence of child, or steam, has allowed the True Knot to become almost immortal, or quasi immortal, I should say, because they can die in a process known as cycling, where their body sort of grows invisible, but then comes back and then grows invisible again, and etc., etc., until they finally just like literally waste away to nothing Their whole body disappears. All that's left of them are their clothes. Um. So yeah, They don't look all that odd though. The True Knot just look like normal people. They look like your typical middle-aged group of people who travel around in bungalows and um, no, not bungalows, sorry, like RVs and campers and stuff like that. Winnebagos. I meant to say Winnebagos. So yeah, it's interesting. The way that these three intersect is that Abra is looking through is at a store one day and sees these signs for missing children and gets a vision of the True Knot killing in a very gruesome way this child and stealing his steam. So she somehow got to look into Rose's mind. Rose, again, is the leader of the True Knot. So Rose is apparently somewhat psychic and knows that. You'll have to excuse that noise, sorry. Somehow knows that Abra has gotten inside of her mind. And she can tell that Abra has like the most powerful version of the Shining ever. Or the most, well, they don't notice the Shining, they notice steam. And so the rest of the book basically for Rose and the True Knot, the rest of the book is them trying to find Abra and steal her steam. For Abra and Danny, or Dan as he prefers to be known, the rest of the book is about them meeting up and, forming a bond with each other because they both have this power. And Dan sort of becomes like Dick Halloran was in the first book, except a lot edgier. So, like I said, it's not a rehash. I don't want to spoil the ending or anything, because if you haven't read it, it's been out for a good year and a half now, but still, I hate when people spoil things in their videos about when I watch reviews, I hate when people spoil the ending. And so I won't tell you what happens. All I can tell you is that Abra and Dan team up to try to defeat the True Knot. So that's basically the review of Doctor Sleep. The main character, of course, is Dan Torrance. Abra Stone is a main character as well, I suppose. As are the main villains are the True Knot, with the big main villain being Rose the Hat. There's a bunch of other main characters. Abra's parents are, or at least Abra's father has a fairly large role, Dave Stone. There's also John Dalton, who is very coincidentally Abra's pediatrician and a doctor who goes to the same AA meetings that Dan does. There's also Casey Kingsley, who is the man that convinces Dan to join AA, which he's not a main character, but he's a pretty important one. Also Billy Freeman, who is an older gentleman who works in the same town that Dan eventually gets a job in and helps Dan keep an eye on Abra. So, yeah, there are other members of the True Knot whose names I'm forgetting. There's Barry the Chink and a few others. Yeah, it's just really interesting. Totally recommend checking it out, especially if you were a fan of The Shining. It is not at all like the original novel, The Shining, but it's very good. There are references to Dick Halloran and Wendy Torrance. There's even several references to Jack Torrance, seeing as how Dan becomes very much like Jack for quite a while. So yeah, it's very good. The only other thing that I have to say about it really is that um, if you've seen the film version of The Shining, the Stanley Kubrick, or Kubrick, however you want to pronounce his name, I don't know, I pronounce it Kubrick. The Stanley Kubrick film, it doesn't follow the film. You'd have to read the book version of The Shining first if you wanted to read Doctor Sleep, or at least I suggest that. There is a very snide reference to the Kubrick film where, there's Kubrick has the motel have a bunch of windows in a certain room where in the original novel they didn't have windows in a certain room. And so King makes a very snide reference to that at one point. I don't really understand King's problem with Kubrick's adaptation. I know that it's way different than the book. I get it. But at the same time, you know, it's a masterpiece, and it has probably introduced so many people to that novel. Um, so yeah, and it's, in my opinion, it's just a masterpiece of filmmaking. So I wasn't a big fan of the few snide references we get to, you know, the the film version of The Shining. There's also an author's note at the very end which explains a bit more about it, which, at 560 something pages, you have plenty of explanation, though. It's a pretty sizable book. You'll have to excuse my hand here. I mean, it's a pretty sizable book. Uh, so, you know, basically, I mean, it's nothing like The Stand. It's not dictionary proportions, of course, but it's pretty big. Um, Although I suppose that for King, this is an average size book. So, yeah. Well, that's pretty much all I've got to say about Doctor Sleep. I probably haven't told you very much about it. I'm trying to be vague while not giving too much away about it, while still wanting people to read the book and trying to get people interested in it. So if you have any questions, please ask a question in the comments below, and I will definitely be more than happy to answer. All right, well, that's it. This is Tony Young, and this has been, excuse me, sorry for my hand. This has been my review of Doctor Sleep, the sequel to The Shining by Stephen King. Just in case you're wondering, the picture on the cover of the book, you can see that there's a woman in a top hat. Yeah, that's Rose. The cover of the book has Rose. So, alright. Well, hope you've enjoyed it. Leave a comment below telling me what I can, how I can improve my reviews, because, there's always room for improvement. And being as this is my first one, I'm sure I can do a lot to improve it. Alright. Well, this is Tony Young